In 1942, 6 fighter planes and 2 bombers made an emergency landing on the Greenland ice sheet, mid-mission in the middle of a war. Every single crew member walked away. The planes didn't. And what happened to them over the following decades, how fast the ice actually swallowed them, raises an odd, very specific question about how old that ice really is. Officially, Greenland's ice sheet has been building for the better part of 1 million years, laid down slowly, one thin layer at a time, since long before anyone was around to watch it happen. That number comes from isotope analysis, and ice cores drilled a mile down into the sheet. It's a careful method, and a respected one. But we also have something rarer than an isotope reading. A set of real objects with a real documented burial date sitting inside that same ice. A wartime accident that turned, decades later, into an accidental experiment nobody planned. And when you run the numbers on how fast the ice actually buried them, you land on an answer that doesn't sit anywhere close to 1 million years. Not even close. So today, we follow that one story all the way through. The planes, the official dating method, and the math sitting quietly in between the two. Quick pause. If you've been here before, thank you, genuinely. That means more than you'd think for a channel this size. And if you're new, one subscribe helps more than you'd guess. One honest note before we start. Everything here is my best reading of some genuinely strange material. If it clashes with what you know, that's fine. Neither of us needs to win. Nothing here is final. On the 15th of July, 1942, during a wartime ferry mission bound for Britain, thick weather and low visibility forced a formation of aircraft to turn back. 6 P-38 fighters and 2 B-17 bombers put down together on the open ice field in eastern Greenland. Every crew member made it out safely. The planes stayed exactly where they landed. Nobody came back for them right away. There was a war to fight, and 8 aircraft sitting on an ice sheet weren't a priority. Decades passed, and the ice kept doing what ice does, season after season, falling, packing, burying, one winter at a time. By 1988, when a search team finally pinpointed the wreck using old flight logs, radar equipment, and a great deal of patience, the planes weren't anywhere near the surface anymore. They were sitting under roughly 250 feet of solid ice. It took 4 more years of slow, careful excavation before one of the fighters was finally cut free, hauled to the surface, and rebuilt piece by piece into flying condition. A plane that's flown at air shows ever since under the name Glacier Girl. 250 feet of ice in 46 years over one single known dated event. That's not a theory, and it's not a model. That's measured. Here's the official method for comparison. Research teams from the United States, the former Soviet Union, Denmark, and France have drilled more than 1 mile down into the polar ice, pulling out long cylindrical cores and reading them almost like tree rings. Oxygen isotopes, tiny bubbles of trapped ancient air, layers of dust and acid, all lined up in order and counted. Using that method, the deepest, oldest layers of the Greenland ice sheet are dated to somewhere in the hundreds of thousands of years. Some estimates for the very oldest ice fragments found on the island push closer to 1 million. Here's the detail we're sitting with though. Past the first few thousand years where individual annual layers are still visible enough to count by eye, the deeper ages stop being read directly off the ice. They get calculated instead, built from models of past snowfall, past temperature, and past ice flow, all the way down to the bottom of the sheet. That doesn't automatically make the method wrong. Plenty of good science works this way. But it's fair to ask how much of that final number is direct observation, and how much of it is assumption dressed up as measurement. So bring the two together. 250 feet of ice in 46 years works out to roughly 5.5 feet of accumulation a year at that spot on the ice sheet. stretch that same rate across the average thickness of the Greenland ice sheet as a whole, somewhere around 4,000 to 5,000 feet, and you land on an age of somewhere around 700 to 900 years for the ice sheet itself. Not a million years, not 100,000, 700 to 900. To be fair, that's a rough estimate, stretched a long way from a single data point, and it comes with a real catch worth saying out loud. Fresh snow sitting near the surface compacts differently than ice that's been compressed for tens of thousands of years further down, and accumulation rates shift with the climate of any given century, faster during cold stretches, slower during warm ones. A number built this way was never going to be exact. Still, it's a strange dap to sit with. One method, using a real, dated physical event that actually happened and was actually measured, lands in the hundreds of years. Another method, built on models layered over models, lands in the hundreds of thousands. Both of those can't be measuring the same thing the same way. Put the two numbers side by side, and the official timeline stops feeling quite so settled. If one dated physical event gives you centuries instead of eons, maybe the deep ice cores aren't wrong about the layers themselves. Maybe they're wrong about how fast those layers were actually laid down, especially through documented cold stretches, like the Little Ice Age, a real recorded cooling period running from around the 1300s into the 1800s, that could easily have piled ice on far faster than today's slow, steady average. And if that's true, it lines up with something we already dug into a while back on this channel. The old maps hinting at a Greenland with open water, mountains, and green land where there's only white today. Looking at it now, next to a squadron of warplanes, it might just be the same mystery wearing two different masks. So we're left holding two very different clocks. One built on isotopes and layered models, stretching back the better part of a million years. The other built on a single, real, dated physical event, landing somewhere in the low hundreds. Both of them can't be telling the full story. I don't know which clock sits closer to the truth, but the next time someone hands you an exact number for how old that ice is, it's worth asking which method got them there, and how much of it they actually watched happen with their own eyes. If this one stuck with you, send it to someone who likes a good puzzle. And if you haven't already, go back and watch our video on Greenland's old maps and the greener land they once showed, because this one was hiding in plain sight the whole time.